Okay, so we're diving into gaslighting today. You've
Yes.
sent us a ton of stuff. Articles, expert opinions, all about gaslighting. And we're going to kind of sift through it all together, figure out where this term came from.
Mm-hmm.
How can we spot it out in the world? And most importantly, how to deal with it if you ever encounter it.
Well, the fascinating thing is that gaslighting, it's not just a trendy buzzword. You know, it has a really specific origin story,
Oh, okay.
and it goes back to a 1938 play
Wow.
and a 1944 film adaptation,
Okay.
both called Gaslight.
Gaslight. Okay. Interesting. So tell me a bit more about this play.
Sure.
And how did it end up giving such a powerful name to this phenomena?
Well, both the play and the film feature a husband who is really systematically trying to convince his wife that she's losing her mind.
Oh, wow.
And he does things like dimming the gaslights in their home and then pretending he hasn't touched them,
Oh, wow.
and insisting that she's imagining the change.
So he's literally using the gaslights to manipulate her perception of reality.
Mhm. Exactly. And it goes beyond the gaslights.
Okay.
He hides things, moves objects, and then just denies her reality when she questions these strange occurrences.
Oh, wow.
It's really messed up.
That's really creepy.
Yeah. And to top it all off, he isolates her from her friends and family.
Oh, so she has no one to validate what she's seeing.
Exactly. So she has no one to turn to confirm her experience,
Wow.
making her doubt herself even more and all this to get his hands on her inheritance.
That's really intense. So it started out as this really calculated and extreme form of manipulation,
Right.
almost like psychological warfare.
Exactly.
Wow. So the term has obviously evolved over time because we don't hear about gaslighting only in these extreme situations.
Right.
So how has the term evolved?
So while it initially described these very intense cases,
Hmm.
gaslighting today is used to describe a much broader spectrum of manipulative behaviors, many of which are far more subtle.
I see. So the scale might be different, but that goal is the same.
Yeah.
To gain power and control over someone by making them question their sanity.
Precisely.
Okay. And that's why it's so important to understand the different tactics.
Right.
Because it can be so difficult to detect, especially in the early stage. Like you said, it's often subtle
Mm-hmm.
and it escalates gradually.
Yeah. And you might even brush it off as someone just being difficult or insensitive, not realizing that there's this insidious pattern that's unfolding.
Right. And that's where these top 5 gaslighting phrases from one of these articles you sent come in.
Yes.
I have to admit, when I was looking through this list, some of them were so I was like, oh,
Yeah.
man, I bet I've even said some of these myself without realizing it. It made me really stop and think.
It's amazing how often these phrases are disguised as something else.
Mhm.
They might sound caring or concerned on the surface, but underneath, they're designed to undermine your confidence
Right.
and make you question your perceptions.
Okay, so let's get into some specific examples. One of the first ones that jumped out at me was, I'm actually really concerned about you. You seem all over the place.
Yes.
On the surface, that sounds like someone's worried about you, but
But it's often a way to just trivialize your feelings.
Right.
And plant those seeds of doubt. They're subtly suggesting that your emotional responses are somehow excessive or abnormal,
Yep.
making you second guess yourself.
yeah, it's so sneaky.
It is.
It's like a backhanded compliment.
Mhm.
And then there's that classic denial tactic. I never said that, or you're making things up. I mean,
Yeah.
talk about frustrating.
No, especially when you know they said it.
Exactly.
And did it.
Right.
The goal there is to make you question your memory.
Yes.
And if you hear it enough times, you start to think, can I even trust myself?
Right.
Can I even trust my own recollection of events?
Right.
Which is exactly what the gaslighter wants.
They're erasing your reality and replacing it with their own.
Exactly. And sometimes it's not even outright denial. It's more like, are you sure you didn't dream that? Or you must be misremembering.
Yeah, I hate that one.
It makes you feel like you are going crazy.
It does.
Yeah, it really plays on our inherent vulnerabilities, you know?
Yeah.
We all have moments where we question our memory,
Mm.
and the gaslighter exploits that. They're
Yeah.
basically saying your perception of reality is faulty,
Right.
which can be very unsettling.
So we've got the trivializing, we've got the denial.
Mm-hmm.
What other tactics should we be on the lookout for?
Well, one that's particularly insidious is shifting blame.
Okay.
You know those phrases like, if only you behaved differently, I wouldn't have to, or you're making me act this way.
Ugh.
Yo.
It's like they're saying their bad behavior is your fault.
Exactly. Instead of taking responsibility for their actions, they're making you feel responsible for their negativity.
Okay.
It's a way of manipulating you into changing your behavior to suit their needs and avoiding any accountability for themselves.
Which, of course, feeds right back into that power and control dynamic.
Exactly.
That's at the heart of all of this.
Yeah, you start walking on eggshells, constantly trying to anticipate their reactions and avoid setting them off.
This is all starting to sound pretty bleak. Is there any hope of breaking free from this cycle once it starts?
Oh, absolutely, there's hope.
Okay.
But before we jump into how to fight back, I think it's important to understand just how damaging gaslighting can be.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's not just about feeling confused or frustrated in the moment. The impact can be profound and long-lasting.
I imagine constantly being told that your reality is wrong would take a serious toll on anyone's mental health.
When someone consistently gaslights you, it can lead to a whole host of psychological effects.
Okay.
We're talking chronic anxiety, depression, even symptoms of PTSD in some cases.
PTSD. Really?
It absolutely can be. Imagine living in a constant state of uncertainty.
Right.
Never knowing if you can trust your own senses or memories. That kind of psychological stress can be incredibly traumatic.
One of the sources that you sent mentioned an expert, Dr. Giovanna Childs, and how gaslighting erodes your sense of self-worth and trust. And that really resonated with me.
Yes.
You know, it's like the longer it goes on, the more you start to believe that you are the problem.
That's a crucial point. Gaslighting chips away at your confidence. It makes you doubt your judgment and instincts. You start to second-guess yourself in every situation, becoming increasingly reliant on the gaslighter for validation and approval.
So it becomes this vicious cycle.
Exactly. The more they gaslight you, the more you doubt yourself.
Right.
The more vulnerable you become to further manipulation.
And this damage can ripple out into other areas of your life as well.
Absolutely.
Like it can affect your other relationships.
Yeah. Victims of gaslighting often struggle to form healthy relationships in the future because they've been conditioned to doubt their own perceptions and accept blame. It can impact their careers, their friendships, their entire sense of self.
So I'm really starting to see how insidious this is. It's not just about winning an argument or getting your way. It's about systematically dismantling someone's sense of reality.
Exactly.
And their trust in themselves.
And that's why it's so important to remember that gaslighting is a form of abuse, plain and simple. And no matter what the gaslighter might try to make you believe, it is never the victim's fault.
Okay, so knowing all this, what can someone actually do if they're caught in a situation where they're being gaslighted? Is there any way to fight back and reclaim their reality?
Absolutely. There are steps you can take to protect yourself and regain control.
Okay.
One of the most important things, and something that really resonated with me, is to trust your gut.
Oh, okay.
If something feels wrong, it probably is.
Yeah.
Don't ignore those feelings just because someone is telling you to.
That's easier said than done, though, right?
It is.
Especially if you've been gaslighted for a while.
Yeah.
You're already second-guessing yourself all the time.
Right.
So how do you know if it's your intuition or just paranoia?
That's where documentation comes in.
Right.
Start keeping a journal or a log of the gaslighting incidents. Write down what happened, what was said, how it made you feel.
Okay.
This serves a couple of purposes. First, it helps you see the patterns of manipulation more clearly.
Okay.
Sometimes when you're in the midst of it, it can be hard to see the forest for the trees.
Right.
But when you have it all written down, the gaslighter's tactics become much more obvious.
So it's like creating a paper trail of the abuse.
Exactly.
So you can't deny it even if you wanted to.
Right. And the second benefit of documentation is that it can validate your experiences.
Okay.
When the gaslighter starts telling you you're imagining things or making things up, you have concrete evidence to counter their claims.
Yeah.
It's harder for them to twist reality when you have a written record of what actually happened.
So it takes away their power to rewrite history. That's really smart.
Another powerful tool is talking to trusted friends or family members. Choose people who are supportive and who you know will believe you.
Right.
Share your experiences with them and ask for their perspective.
So it's like getting that external validation, that reality check to counter the gaslighter's distortion.
And sometimes just having someone else acknowledge your reality can be incredibly empowering.
Right.
It reminds you that you're not alone and that you don't have to buy into the gaslighter's version of events.
What about setting boundaries?
Oh, boundaries are crucial.
Okay.
But you're right, they can be hard to establish and enforce.
Yeah.
Start by identifying what behaviors you're no longer willing to tolerate. It might be specific phrases they use, certain topics they bring up, or even just the way they talk to you. Once you've identified those boundaries, Communicate them clearly and directly to the gaslighter.
I can already imagine the pushback.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you're being too sensitive. Or, I would never do that.
Oh, yeah, they'll try to gaslight you about the boundaries themselves, but that's where consistency and self-respect come in.
Okay.
You have to stand firm in your boundaries, even when they try to challenge them. And remember, you don't owe them an explanation or justification for your boundaries. They are yours to set and enforce.
Sounds like this takes a lot of courage and inner strength.
It does.
Especially when you've been worn down by gaslighting.
And that's why I think seeking professional help is crucial.
Okay.
Especially if the gaslighting is severe or persistent. A therapist can help you process the experience, rebuild your self-esteem, and develop coping mechanisms for dealing with the manipulator.
So a therapist can provide that safe space.
Exactly.
To unpack all the confusion and hurt.
Yes.
And to help you start to heal from the damage that's been done.
Precisely. They can also teach you strategies for setting boundaries, communicating more assertively, and recognizing the early warning signs of gaslighting so you can protect yourself in the future.
So they're giving you the tools to reclaim your power and build a stronger, healthier sense of self. So we've talked about gaslighting in relationships.
Right.
But you mentioned earlier that it can show up in other areas of life too, like the workplace or even in politics. Can you give me some examples of how that might play out?
Sure, let's start with the workplace.
Okay.
Imagine you have a colleague who constantly undermines your work, takes credit for your ideas, or spreads rumors about you behind your back. Then when you confront them about it, they deny it all, tell you you're being paranoid, or even try to turn it around and make you look like the problem.
Oh, I've seen that happen.
Yeah.
It's so toxic.
It creates such a demoralizing work environment.
And it can be incredibly damaging to your career, too. You start to doubt your abilities, you lose confidence in your contributions, and you might even hesitate to speak up or share your ideas.
Yes, for fear of being shut down or ridiculed.
It's like they're silencing your voice.
Exactly.
And making you question your value within the team.
And in politics, gaslighting can be even more insidious because it often plays out on a much larger scale, impacting entire groups of people. Think about how certain political leaders or groups might distort facts, manipulate statistics, or control the narrative to fit their agenda.
And then when people point out inconsistencies or challenge those claims, they're dismissed as being biased or uninformed.
Right, or even unpatriotic.
Yeah.
It's a classic tactic to discredit dissenting voices and maintain control over the information that people are exposed to.
And the scary thing is that when it's done effectively, it can make people question their own judgment and ability to discern truth from falsehood.
It's like they're eroding the foundation of critical thinking and creating a society where people are more susceptible to manipulation.
And that's why it's more important now than ever to be aware of these tactics, to be critical consumers of information.
Yes.
And to trust our own instincts when something feels off. So gaslighting, whether it's happening in our personal relationships, our workplaces, or even on a societal level, it's something that we all need to be vigilant about.
Absolutely. And I think the first step towards that vigilance is recognizing that we're all capable of engaging in gaslighting behaviors, even if we don't mean to.
Wait, you're saying that we could be the gaslighters without even realizing it?
It's definitely possible. We all have blind spots. And sometimes we react in ways that are hurtful or dismissive without understanding the impact our words or actions are having on others.
So what are some red flags that we might be unintentionally gaslighting someone? What should we be paying attention to in our own behavior?
Well, one common red flag is minimizing someone else's feelings.
Okay.
If someone is expressing hurt or frustration and our response is to tell them they're overreacting, being too sensitive, or that they're making a big deal out of nothing, that can be a form of gaslighting.
So instead of trying to understand their perspective, we're essentially dismissing it as invalid.
And even if we don't agree with their feelings, it's important to validate that their feelings are real to them. And just saying something like, I can see why you're feeling that way, can make a huge difference.
It's about acknowledging their reality even if we don't fully understand it.
Another sign is constantly denying someone's reality.
Okay.
If someone is sharing your experience and we keep saying things like, that never happened, or you're remembering it wrong, even when they have evidence to the contrary, that's a problem.
It's like we're trying to control the narrative to impose our version of events on them, even if it contradicts their lived experience.
And it can be incredibly invalidating and hurtful for the other person. It sends the message that their perceptions and memories can't be trusted.
So how can we avoid falling into that trap? Is it just about being more careful with our words, or is there something deeper?
I think it starts with being more mindful of our own defensiveness.
Okay.
Often when we deny someone's reality, it's because we feel threatened or uncomfortable with what they're saying. Maybe it challenges our own self-image, or maybe we're afraid of the consequences of admitting we were wrong.
So it's about being more honest with ourselves about why we're reacting the way we are.
Exactly. And then it's about being willing to listen with an open mind, even if what we're hearing is difficult.
Yeah.
It's about putting ourselves in the other person's shoes
Yeah.
and trying to see the situation from their perspective.
And that takes empathy, which I imagine can be challenging, especially if we're feeling attacked or blamed.
It definitely takes effort.
Yeah.
But remember, even if we disagree with someone's perspective, it's still valid for them.
Right.
And by acknowledging that, we create a space for dialogue and understanding, rather than conflict and denial.
Okay, so minimizing feelings and denying reality are two big red flags. What else should we be looking out for in our own behavior?
Another subtle form of gaslighting that many people do without realizing it is deflecting blame.
Oh, yeah, like when we make ourselves the victim.
Instead of taking responsibility for our actions, we twist things around to make it seem like the other person is attacking us. We might say things like, well, if you hadn't done X, then I wouldn't have done Y, or you're always so critical of me.
It's like we're trying to shift the focus away from our own behavior and make the other person feel guilty or defensive, even if they were the one who was initially hurt.
And that kind of deflection shuts down any possibility of productive communication or resolution. It prevents us from taking ownership of our mistakes and learning from them.
So to avoid unintentionally gaslighting others, it sounds like we need to be more self-aware, more empathetic,
Yes.
and more willing to take responsibility for our actions.
Well said. It's about creating a dynamic of mutual respect and understanding in our relationships, where both parties feel safe to express themselves honestly and authentically without fear of being dismissed or manipulated.
But the good news is that awareness is the first step to protection and empowerment.
The more we understand the tactics of gaslighting, both in ourselves and in others, the less power it has over us.
Right.
We can learn to trust our gut, document our experiences, set boundaries, and seek support when needed. And just as importantly, we can learn to recognize and address our own potentially gaslighting behaviors so that we can create healthier, more respectful relationships in all aspects of our lives.
I love that it's about empowering ourselves and those around us to break free from these harmful patterns and build relationships based on trust, authenticity, and mutual respect.
It's about creating a dynamic of mutual respect and understanding in our relationships, where both parties feel safe to express themselves honestly and authentically without fear of being dismissed or manipulated.
So to wrap up our deep dive into gaslighting, it's clear that this is a complex and insidious form of manipulation that can show up in so many different areas of our lives. But the good news is that awareness is the first step to protection and empowerment.
Absolutely. The more we understand the tactics of gaslighting, both in ourselves and in others, the less power it has over us. We can learn to trust our gut, document our experiences, set boundaries, and seek support when needed.
Remember, knowledge is power. And by understanding gaslighting, we take away its power to manipulate and control us.